can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Cliff McDonald of BrainheartGrowth.com. And Cliff, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out some other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Kevin Hundle, because I had Kevin on, he introduced Cliff. So thanks, Kevin. He's an entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience. That episode was great, because he talks about building, scaling, pivoting multiple companies, and he's been using EOS in his various companies. He helps people actually implement EOS. Also, Gino Wickman, check that episode out. He's the author of Traction, who started EOS. Mark Winters, he co-authored Rocket Fuel with Gino Wickman, so check that episode out. I know, Cliff, you like that one too, the visionary and the integrator. And then Tony Gregmeyer, founder of Ship Offers. They ship out over 1 million orders per year. But what was interesting about that is Tony is really open about how he almost lost it all because of addiction stuff. And we may cover that on this particular episode as well. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. Cliff, we call ourselves the kind of the magic elves that work in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they could just create great content, develop relationships, and run their business. So the number one thing in my life is relationships, and I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships, and I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire on this planet and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm really excited to introduce Cliff McDonald. He's co-founder and managing partner of Brainheart Growth. They're a growth advisory consulting firm for lower mid-market businesses. And he's also the author. By the time people watch this, Cliff, it will be out, I'm sure. And so of Rev Generate, short for Revenue Generation Mastery. Sales can have a bad connotation for people. So Cliff doesn't like necessarily use always the term sales training. It's just revenue generation. Really, that's what it's about. And Cliff's early professional career was in corporate sales. He did business development roles in Wall Street and high tech. And since 2004, he's been an entrepreneur. He's chairman of the board at RehabPath, which has been a client of theirs for many years. And they've grown from 4 staff to 55 staff. And Cliff, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm excited to be here and grateful for the opportunity to spend some time with you.
Talk about, just start with Brainheart Growth and what you do.
Yeah, Brainheart Growth, relatively new organization, Jeremy, just about 4 years old. And as you mentioned, a growth advisory consulting firm. So we're very focused on driving revenue. So anyone who works in business knows the top line of a profit and loss statement is called revenue. And we want to make that go up and to the right. And it's hard to do. So we are specifically focused on that part of the business. Lower market businesses, lower mid-market businesses, early stage companies, getting a stranger, Jeremy, to work with you and to spend money with you. Most of these companies do not have brand awareness. So it's a lot more challenging, actually, in many ways, to be a revenue generator in a lower mid-market company than it is in an established Fortune 2000 company. And really at heart, we want to help people, and we want to help people who need the most help. And that's why we're focused on this part of the market.
Yeah, and we're going to dig into how you help people. But I just wanted to, Cliff, bring this up for a second and talk about what we're seeing here. And if you're watching or if you're listening to the audio version, we're seeing a picture here, and I'll let Cliff describe what we're looking at?
Oh, that's funny, Jeremy. You did your homework for sure. That's an iconic picture that all of our family and friends are familiar with. I am a 2.5-year-old young boy, and I am scared because Muhammad Ali is holding me, and he's
This
talking
is you
to
right
me.
here, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. And the man in the right hand part of the screen is my dad, the only person looking at the camera and smiling. So my father, Jeremy, is from South Boston. Grew up in South Boston, Southie, as you may know, from Good Will Hunting and Whitey Bulger fame, working class Irish Catholic neighborhood. My dad was a tremendously gifted athlete, and went to the University of New Hampshire on a football scholarship, where he had a great career as an All-American. I think they won 2 Yankee Conference championships. My dad was captain of the team. Graduated, he met my mom there. They missed the family planning class because they had not 1 but 2 kids when they were in undergrad. So my dad got a job as a teacher. He was a phys ed teacher in the Boston Public School District, and he loved teaching and coaching. My mom stayed at home with the kids, so my dad wanted to get a second job to make some extra money to support the family. And instead of, bagging groceries or doing some landscaping or something like that, someone presented an opportunity for him to become a professional boxer. And my father had never had an amateur fight, which is odd. In boxing, most people have long amateur careers before they turn pro. But my dad estimates that growing up in Southie, he had a couple of hundred street fights. And that was just part of the culture. My grandfather was 82nd Airborne, World War II veteran, 3 Purple Hearts, as tough as they come. And my grandfather learned how to box in the military, and I guess taught my dad how to defend himself. So my dad had pretty quick success and ended up becoming New England heavyweight champion. I don't know how much you know about boxing, Jeremy, but Ali lost his titles because he was a conscientious objector in Vietnam. So he was stripped of his titles, I think, for 5 years, and then he was reinstated. This was part of a PR tour when Ali got back in the game. So they did a tour probably nationally and stopped in big markets. One of them was Boston, where he did an exhibition match with the New England heavyweight champion at the time, my father. And for my dad, that this was, he looked up to Ali. Ali was
So
such a
your dad
large
boxed
character.
Muhammad Ali.
Yeah. Well, exhibition.
Well, whatever.
Yeah. So Jeremy,
I'm not stepping in a ring with Muhammad Ali. So yeah.
Right. And you know how, oral lore is, right? If you are from South Boston, Massachusetts, and you're the New England heavyweight champ, it became, for me, all I heard was your father fought Muhammad Ali, which was absolutely wonderful, but it also was challenging, right? Because early on, I remember realizing that there is no way I can be like this guy. He's special. He's gifted. So that presented some challenges too. But my dad was a very, very special guy. He passed away, unfortunately, in 2004. Miss him every day.
Sorry to hear that.
But yeah, thanks for digging this up. This brings back some great memories.
Talk about some of the lessons you learned from your dad.
My dad had an unbelievable work ethic. As I mentioned, that was his second job. And he did that for a few years, and then he ended up going back to school and became a master plumber. So my dad's routine, Jeremy, was, every day during the week when I got up, he was gone. So I think he left the house at 5 or 5:30. He was the first one to school. We ended up living in a suburb of Boston called Melrose, about 7 miles north of downtown, the last stop on Orange Line. My dad worked for Boston Public Schools, inner city. And then he would go in, and I think he had it structured where he always had last period off. So he would leave school, and then he would put on his plumbing uniform, and he would go work and do his plumbing work, and he would come home late. and eat a late dinner and fall asleep in his chair, go up to bed and do it again. And he would work on the weekends too. So I learned great work ethic from my father. My dad was also, he was a really interesting guy. So, growing up in South Boston, an emphasis on being physically tough and resilient, and a lot of violence, and also a lot of, I would say, alcoholism that maybe wasn't even perceived as alcoholism, and substance use. And then he went away, first one to go to college in the late 60s, which was a very interesting time, right? Vietnam, hippies, civil rights. And that had a real positive influence on my dad. I think my dad became very open-minded. And I think my dad realized that he was a peaceful person, and he was a compassionate, kind, loving person. So he really embraced diversity too. And my dad was friends with so many different people. And I think because of the way he grew up and the culture, and kind of the rules of where you grew up, is that you have to respect everyone, and you never know, right, where someone's come from or their story. You've never walked a day in their shoes. So my dad exhibited that, as well as anyone I know, and I'm really thankful for that.
I want to talk about, we were talking before we hit record, the importance of core values. And so the evolution of your core values, business core values, family core values, come from this. And so I'd love to hear, so you talked about your dad a little bit. I know you had a storied career in sports, high school, college. What's a lesson you learned from your high school, maybe coach, and then from college?
Yeah, core values are so important, and being intentional with core values is so important. Jeremy, there's a real risk with accidental core values. And these are things that happen in group dynamics when we've got kind of unwritten rules, and sometimes the wrong behaviors are rewarded or tolerated. So I was a late bloomer athletically, and as I mentioned, I realized early, like, wow, it's going to be really difficult to be like my dad. But I wanted to play football, and my dad actually didn't let me. He didn't think there was any need to play organized youth football, with pads and equipment and all that. Played a ton of football in the park with friends, right? So finally in 8th grade, my dad let me play football, and it was not a good start. My first game, actually a scrimmage in 8th grade, and in my town, Melrose, we played on the freshman team as 8th graders. I broke my femur.
Wow.
In the
Holy
third
cow.
play that I was in, a complete break, like a pop, you could hear it. And I ended up being in traction in the hospital for almost 2 months. So that was a tough start. But then I recovered, and my parents let me play the next year. And then I ended up playing, 4 years at high school, and then 4 years at Dartmouth College. I played and coached for a year overseas in France and in Finland, won 2 Ivy League championships. My sophomore year in high school, we didn't have a very good team, and the culture of that program with the kids who were the leaders of that program, it wasn't great. I wouldn't say it was toxic, and I think this was prevalent then, especially in that sport. There was a lot of hazing, and the upperclassmen would really give the underclassmen a really hard time. A lot of teasing and pointing out, physical things, right? Body stuff, whatever. And it wasn't that much fun. And it was kind of confusing to me, because I had wanted to play this game and be a part of this thing. And, but what do I know? I'm 15 years old, questioning, I guess this is just the way it's supposed to work. And then my senior year, I was named captain. We had a tradition of having one captain in my school. So my sophomore year, we won 3 games. My junior year, we won 2 games. but we started a lot of underclassmen, and we knew we had something good. And I don't remember how intentional it was, but I remember we wanted to change the culture and make it less the way it was and be more nurturing and supportive of the younger kids, knowing what we had experienced, and we did not want our pound of flesh. And as the leader, I wasn't going to tolerate that. And I think, again, going back to my dad, where, we have to look out for everyone and be compassionate and kind and loving. And it worked. So after winning 2 games our junior year, we ended up winning our first 7 games of the season, and we were ranked first in the state, and no one really expected that. It was pretty cool. So that was the first time I really realized how changing, and you need talent, of course you do, right? But I think that the core values and the culture of any organization is the most important thing, whether that's a family, a team, an athletic team, a business organization. My favorite business quote, Jeremy, is Peter Drucker, and culture eats strategy for breakfast. Over and over and over again.
Love it. I've heard you talk about this, and I wanted to have you explain it. You were asked about, someone was asking you, because you come in and you help revenue generation and sales teams, and they're asking you, what do you do if someone asks, what do you do if someone doesn't hit their sales, what their goals, their sales goals. And you explained how sales is one piece, but marketing sits on top. But then can you talk about that? Because this relates to the core values, because you kind of backed it up to what has to start before it trickles down to someone hitting their sales goals. So what has to be in place?
Absolutely. So it's a really interesting topic, Jeremy. What happens if an individual person who has a sales quota does not hit that quota? So my early career in the business world, from 1993 to 1992 to 1996, was on Wall Street. Great opportunity. Learned a ton about the capital markets. Wasn't extremely inspired there. Left, tried some entrepreneurial things on my own, failed, rebuilt a little bit. And then I ended up in tech. Could kind of see, I actually have to give myself some credit. I could kind of see where it was going, right? And this was when the World Wide Web was not even really adopted from a commercial perspective, which is crazy because that was only, 25, 27 years ago. So I ended up in a really high growth area, which was fantastic. Ended up working for a company that went through an IPO. And then I worked for bigger companies. One of them was Sprint, right? A large telecommunications company. That culture, Jeremy, they said it was 100% accountability. If you don't hit your number, right, you're 6 months, there's a revolving door, right? And if you don't hit your number, publicly traded companies, you have to report earnings to Wall Street. So the accountability is good, right? We have to be results oriented. But the environment that creates often is one of selfishness and one of borderline unethical behavior too, right? Like, I have to get this deal done, right? So what does that promote? And this, in some ways, you could say wasn't that long ago, but it was a long time ago. I think we've changed so much with core values and with, humanistic approaches to business, but there are very toxic environments that result from that. So today, when we're working with lower mid-market businesses, a lot of times when we start an engagement, number one, there aren't quotas, there aren't real expectations, there aren't target addressable markets, there aren't ideal client profiles. So a lot of times all these things don't even really exist, and we can help to build them. And it is good to set goals, right? So, okay, can this person be responsible for bringing in $1 million in revenue over the next calendar year, right? And we have to be honest with setting those goals. And if an individual contributor, I don't even like to use that term because it's a team sport. But say this person does have a number, and that is a best practice, and they don't meet that. The first thing we have to do is why, right? How many at-bats did we get? Were those at-bats created by a marketing department that generated leads, right? Were they referrals? Or are we relying on this person to go find opportunities too, which is really hard? And then are we competitive from a product perspective? Are we competitive from a pricing perspective? In the best companies, right, the accountability is going to be at the top, where the leader says, it's on me and you guys are helping, but not, hey, 27-year-old sales kid for a $5 million business, you didn't hit your number, so you got to go find a new job. There are companies that operate that way. They typically do not have high sustained top line growth.
Talk about, you were mentioning a few things on what needs to be put in place, right? Because these companies that you're working with may not have these pieces in place like these Fortune 500 companies you worked with. You mentioned, first of all, figuring out your ideal client profile. What are some of the other things you have to go in and put in place?
Yeah, great question, right? First, you have to have a strategy. We talk about the importance of pre-qualification, which is usually non-existent in the lower mid-market or in early stage companies. Pre-qualification is deciding which companies we are going to try and work with. And we want that to be really specific. So what happens early, Jeremy, is we fall into this WWFM trap, will work for money. So if someone says, hey, I'm interested in working with you, you say, that's awesome. What can we do for you? And you're going to pay us? And you get really broad and you're not disciplined typically. Understandably, though, because you want to generate some revenue so your business can start to grow. So usually we don't see a lot of discipline with who we're even choosing to spend time with. And at the end of the day, it should be, okay, we work best with Midwestern healthcare systems that have 200 to 600 beds that focus on oncology and pediatrics, that are for-profit businesses. They're not 501c3s. That is where we're going to play. And we're going to be very disciplined with doing that. You typically never see that. So that's the first mistake, is we're usually chasing so many different things. And when you're doing that, you can't really get specialized and you can't get efficient. So that's the first thing we want to do, is an exercise. So what is our target addressable market? What is the ideal client profile? So that's like even a subset of the target addressable market. And then, Jeremy, within that, who are the buyer personas? Those are the individuals within that company that have a problem that specific individual is probably responsible for with his or her job description that we might be able to fix. So it's very, very specific, right? And it might be, okay, there are 3 to 5 buyer personas at those types of companies within our target addressable market.
When the companies come to you, are they typically have a sales team in place? They have a small sales team. Where are they typically at with their journey?
Yeah, so early stage companies, right, typically would be newer companies that might have some capital. They might have validated a product, an MVP. They might have some revenue. Typically, we like to work with companies that have hit a 1 million ARR revenue threshold for early stage companies. Mid-market companies, more mature companies, we'd say, 20 million or 50 million in revenue or less. Usually what we see on the smaller end, the early stage companies, the CEO founder is the revenue generator. That's usually how it starts. And then you build out a team. So we see anything from, 2 or 3 revenue responsible people up to 10 or 15. We're a young company, Jeremy, again, only been in business about 4 years. We have not seen ever a good internal development program where we're teaching, coaching, nurturing the required skills and mindset to be an effective revenue generator, which is absolutely insane. Think about what we're doing. We're hiring people and saying, you're going to help us go find people who will give us money and will provide value to them. And you're not giving them training. You're not giving them coaching. And we expect them to be successful. So turnover in lower mid-market companies in revenue responsible roles is really, really high. And think of the wasted capital that goes with that. And for us, it's like, why? How did this become standard? Right? But, one of the reasons why too is because historically, the lower mid-market companies wouldn't have access to resources too. One of the most exciting things is barriers to entry have been reduced. Technology does this. Think of like democratization of tools. Like today, Jeremy, a $5 million company with 40 employees can have a technology stack just as good as a Fortune 100 company, which is awesome. Because now we think that the advantage actually can be with the smaller, we know they can be more nimble, they can be more agile, they can make decisions quicker, but now they're not disadvantaged because they don't have the tools, which is really exciting. And that is recent and it's still happening.
And this is probably a popular question because people love to talk about tools and tech, even though the training, the culture, all that stuff, it's probably gets harder to implement. What are some of the tech stack that you recommend a team have from a sales perspective?
So top of funnel, right? So I think we have this kind of concept of a double funnel P&L. So the P&L, the profit and loss statement, right? Jeremy, a lot of people think of that as the scorecard, the scoreboard for a business, right? You see revenue, cost of goods sold, your gross margin, then your expenses, bottom line, right? 5 line items. Top line revenue. We think that calling revenue top line is misleading. We almost think like revenue is the middle line, and above revenue, you have a sales funnel. Above the sales funnel, you have a marketing funnel. And above that, you have your go-to-market strategy. So there's so much that needs to go into generating revenue. And within those 2 funnels, there are so many breaking points, right? So if we were going to look at tools, at the way top of the funnel is how are you building brand awareness? And how are you measuring that? Who even knows about our brand? Jeremy, so many of these companies, not the early stage companies, but more mature mid-market businesses that might have been around for 20, 30, 80 years, a lot of times they don't have Google Analytics set up. Think about that. They don't know how many people are visiting their website. They don't know where those visitors are coming from. They don't know what content they're consuming. They don't know when they leave the website. So that's a simple thing. The website is an amazing tool. You can connect with the world through your website. So we look at that as a top of funnel metric, right? Google Analytics, right? How many visitors do we have? And then you can look at things, Jeremy, if they are running marketing campaigns, a lot of times they're not, right? Say email marketing, for example. What is our open rate? Right? How many people have downloaded a white paper that we shared? Right? Have we gotten anyone to fill out a form, contact us to set up a discovery call? So those are all things we want to measure. We would call it those top of funnel metrics. And then as we move down the funnel and we have discovery calls, right, you want to have a sales pipeline. And within that sales pipeline, you've got categories stemming from early, right, discovery call arranged to discovery call completed, right? Then maybe you get into proposal proposal sent, negotiation, and then win or loss. Again, recurring theme here, it's common for us to see companies that do not have an effective CRM. And all of the data about the company's opportunities resides in some sales guy's spreadsheet. And I think a lot of us have been guilty of this. I'm sitting here with a notebook in front of me, which is where I still take notes, even on discovery calls. My team does a good job at holding me accountable for making sure these get into our CRM. But think about that, Jeremy, if you're not capturing that data of all of that engagement with potential clients, and you're not capturing that data, and that salesperson leaves, that's IP. That data is valuable, and you've just lost all of that. One of the mindsets that we have to struggle with, and we try and change all the time, is this concept of my territory. Singular, possessive, but historically, so we were talking about CRM and the importance of putting all of the data in a system with prospects and contacts and opportunities, and how important that is, right? We're creating data, we're creating IP for the company. Historically, there's been this mindset, and we fight to change this with a lot of kind of old school sales guys that like, these are his deals. This is his territory, like possessive, singular, which is crazy, right? These are the opportunities for the company, right? And you have the privilege of being able to represent the company and work this territory or manage the relationships with these other businesses and these other people. So if you're not committed to the tools, Jeremy, right, and you're not committed to using technology, you have someone on the team who's out in the field having conversations, discovery calls, finding opportunities. They leave the company and you don't know any of that, right? And so it's really, really important that everyone completely commits to using the tools and the technology. Huge competitive advantage too for a lower mid-market business.
What CRMs do you like or that you use?
Well, we are a HubSpot partner, right? So we love HubSpot. We've only been a partner for a couple of years. Two of my partners were out in Boston last week. They host an awesome
Inbound, yeah.
Inbound, exactly. Yeah. So HubSpot is fantastic. It's also more cost effective. You know, the dominant market player for years and years was Salesforce. Great tool, really expensive. I would almost argue prohibitively expensive for some, lower mid-market companies. So we really like HubSpot. So HubSpot is a CRM, so you can store all of the data for opportunities and contacts. It also is a CMS, which is a content management system. So you can do all of your content, all of your newsletters, email marketing, and it's all connected. It's really a great tool.
Awesome. I want to talk about RehabPath on a number of levels, but what did you and the company do with RehabPath?
Yeah, thanks. RehabPath is a fantastic company. And Jeremy, I personally am in recovery, and I am very public with my recovery, coming up on 5 years. Substance use disorder, alcohol, for me, or you could say I'm a recovering alcoholic. So just kind of randomly, I work out of a place called Starting Block in Madison, which is an awesome entrepreneurial incubator. A few years ago, down the hall, I saw a logo on a door of a company called RehabPath, which I did notice, like, wow, I had been to rehab. I went to rehab twice, actually, to inpatient. And when you are very sick, which I was, you do require that level of care, which means you're going away and living somewhere for a period of time, typically 28 or 30 days. So I met Ben and Jeremiah, who are wonderful human beings. Neither of them is in recovery. They're just absolutely mission-based, fantastic people that want to help people. And they're mission-based. Jeremiah owned a marketing agency called Blend Marketing, which is a wonderful company that helps travel and tourism companies. And Jeremiah, I think, kind of accidentally got a couple of treatment centers as clients. And with working with those clients, he got to learn that marketplace, and he saw that there was opportunities for improvement in that marketplace in the behavioral health treatment center industry. And he came up with an idea of building a platform that would connect people seeking treatment with the right treatment provider at the right time. And we started really just as friends and colleagues down the hall, a lot of discussions about the industry. That turned into a formal, modest engagement. And it just grew, and we became very close partners. One of my partners, Bernie, became involved. He's fantastic, and he helped us in ways that I wasn't able to help. And Jeremy, we've gone from 4 employees to, I think, 55 employees today over the past few years. RehabPath got a Series A capital from HealthX Ventures, an awesome early stage digital healthcare venture capital firm here in Madison. Recently crossed a significant 10 million ARR threshold. So the company is extremely high growth and doing absolutely wonderful work. I was asked to build an advisory board, Jeremy, which you mentioned, and I did. And we were lucky to get 4 amazing leaders from this space who really support our mission. They've been very active with the growth of our business. And, personally, it's the work that I love doing more than any other work. Recovery is hard, and turning the corner is really difficult, and the odds aren't good. Even when you have the privilege to have the best resources and the highest level of care. So again, this is hard. But when you do see people turn the corner and they recover, it's absolutely amazing. And you see people, just these amazing stories of people turning their lives around. And many of them go on to do wonderful work and do their best work. So it's fantastic.
What kind of work did you do with RehabPath when you came on? And I want to point out there is, I went to Madison, right? So there is a top Wisconsin entrepreneur series that I've done on the podcast. I had Troy, who started I think he's one of the people who co-founded Generator. And I've had one of the co-founders of Eat Street, which is actually started in Madison. And actually, I don't know if he still is, but Dan, who is head of the entrepreneurship center, Weiner Center for Entrepreneurship at University of Wisconsin. So we did an interview with Dan Olszewski as well. So check those out. But what work did you do with RehabPath?
Yeah, and I know some of those names, Jeremy. Troy Vossler, I believe. Generator, yep. Right? Yeah, fantastic. Huge impact on the startup community here. Where we did most of our work with RehabPath was in revenue generation. And the business model, Jeremy, for RehabPath, these types of businesses sometimes are called two-sided marketplaces, where there's a B2C, right, the people seeking treatment or loved ones seeking treatment, and the B2B is the healthcare organization, the provider, the treatment center. So the vast majority of treatment centers that you see on the platform, Jeremy, are not paid advertisers. RehabPath has built out about 3,500 profiles for treatment centers. The goal is really to just uplift the entire industry and provide access to care, right? Now, there are a handful, more than a handful, less than 10% of the treatment centers on the platform are paid advertisers. So that's really where we worked mostly, was trying to grow revenue with paid advertisers. Also had a lot of involvement with the technology stack, with strategy. As I mentioned, we did build that board, and we get the opportunity to do a lot of development, working with people on the team, doing some coaching, a lot of strategy. So it's been fantastic. And I have to give credit both to Ben and Jeremiah for being very open-minded and creative with partnerships, and also my partner, Bernie, who's out in San Francisco. Bernie's much better than I am, Jeremy. He's in San Francisco, right in the heart of the tech thing, with the tech stack and the tools and automation and data. And he's been absolutely fantastic on this project.
What kind of work, and let's take a totally different industry for a second, and commercial painting.
Yeah. There's a shift, right, from a digital platform to commercial painting. As you and I discussed earlier, we've got a client in Boston called CE Painting, and certainly not the most glamorous industry, commercial painting. They paint big buildings, and they are a premium brand, however, and we've been working with them for about 2.5 years, and they have tremendous core values. Eric and Chris, Chris and Eric, they've built such a great team from a humanistic perspective. They treat their people extremely well. They're very kind, compassionate people. And in that industry, Jeremy, there's usually really high turnover. In the trades, you get that, right? And painting historically is not considered the most sophisticated of the trades, right? Think of barriers to entry or lack thereof. A lot of people can say, I'm a painter. We've all painted a room in our house, right? Or done something like that. So CE Painting has extremely low turnover because they take care of their people and they have great core values. So that company, Jeremy, I haven't been here this whole time, but in 2017, I believe they were less than $1 million in revenue. And last year, we crossed 10 million in revenue. And they work with some of the biggest and best general contractors in Southern New England and Boston. But we've also, and I've been involved with this, which has been really fun, we've developed a specialization in education. So, there's no shortage of higher education institutions in New England. And CE Painting has developed a real specialization with Northeastern, Wentworth Institute of Technology, Boston University, University of New Hampshire, Tufts University. Painting schools is really tricky. Think about dorms. Think about how big they are. Think about how banged up they get with 18, 19-year-olds living there. And think about the small window you have to do those jobs. So this is what we talked about earlier, Jeremy, with target addressable market, ideal client profile, and buyer persona. And we hadn't seen a commercial painting company that had said, we do this industry really well. So it's been really fun to be a part of that. And we're having great success there.
We just have another minute, Cliff. But I want to know, how does it work to work with you when someone comes on board? What's the process look like?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So typically, just like any other revenue generation sales organization, we'll do discovery. We spend a lot of time in discovery. We really want to try and make sure we understand the business as well as we can and the problems they have before we even recommend a proposal. And then we always start with a modest 90-day engagement. And we do that to reduce risk for both parties. And then our arrangement, Jeremy, typically is a fixed monthly fee on a retainer basis for 90 days. Our most common engagement would be one of our partners that is a fractional leader. So it's basically you're getting a chief revenue officer on a fractional basis, or a chief growth officer. Most of the companies in our target addressable market, Jeremy, could not afford a full-time executive like that. So it makes sense to do that on a fractional basis.
Thanks for laying that out. I just want to point people to your website. Cliff, everyone could check out brainheartgrowth.com to learn more. And I just want to be the first one. Thanks for sharing your journey. And we didn't even get to all of it. I know you own several bars that you opened that you grew to $5 million, and that so many cool stories along the way that got you to brainheartgrowth.com. Everyone check it out. And Cliff, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Really appreciate you taking the time to spend with me here.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.